Good afternoon and welcome to the first Thinking Module debate of the new academic year. My name is Wallace McNeish and I'm Division Leader for Sociology here at Abertay, and I will be chairing today's debate. Each year the Sociology Division organises a series of debates on timeless and timely social, ethical and political issues for first year students in the School of Social and Health Sciences. The aim is to facilitate critical thinking, to help students recognise that the knowledge generated by their disciplines is always contested, and also to enable students to understand how good arguments are constructed. Today's debate, you will no doubt agree, is a very timely one. The referendum on Scotland's future, indeed the constitutional future of the United Kingdom, is only 10 days away, and you will be voting, many of you for the first time, on this historic question on September the 18th. It's also in many senses a timeless issue because people in Scotland, and indeed from across the UK, have been engaging in political debate about Scotland's relationship to the rest of the United Kingdom for at least the last 300 years or so since the Act of Union in 1707. Now, to participate in our debate today, we have four distinguished MSPs from very different sides of the political spectrum. MSPs who've come together under the banners of Yes Scotland and Better Together. From Yes Scotland, I'm delighted to welcome Shona Robeson, MSP from the Scottish National Party, someone who is the MSP for Dundee East and who is also a minister in the SNP Scottish Government at Holyrood. She's joined by Patrick Harvey, who is co-convener of the Scottish Green Party. From Better Together, I'm delighted to welcome Jenny Mara, MSP, who is a Labour representative at Holyrood for North East Scotland. And joining her is Alex Johnston, MSP, who is the Conservative representative for North East Scotland. Now, our debate format is going to be as follows. Shortly, you're going to take part in an audience vote. You've all got clickers, yep, you've all got your voting devices, and you're shortly going to take a vote on this question, electronic vote, and it'll be interesting to see what that vote is. We will also take a vote at the end of the debate to see if there's been any shift in your perspectives as a student audience on this question. To begin with, our speakers are going to make 5-minute opening statements for and against the motion. And they're going to argue very much from the perspective of their own political parties, their own ideological perspectives. So we're going to hear the perspectives from the Labour Party, from the Conservative Party, from the Green Party and from the Scottish National Party. We're also going to have short critical responses to the other arguments, to the arguments on the other side of the debate made by each of our speakers. We will then go to you as an audience, and we'll see if there's any reaction from you as an audience to what our politicians have to say. We will also take some written questions. A number of you have sent in written questions over the last few days to me, and we will at that point ask you to read out your written questions, the ones that we have chosen as most representative of the type of questions that have come into us. We'll finish with some closing statements, short, concise closing statements to sum up the arguments made by each of our politicians. And then we'll close, as I've said, with an audience vote. So, first things, we're going to go to our audience vote. Okay, so you've all got voting devices, and the poll is now open. So you can either hit 1 if you agree with the statement, 2 if you disagree with the statement, and 3 if you haven't yet made your mind up on this statement, on this proposition. It's time for Scotland to become an independent nation state. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Or have you still not made up your mind? Please vote now. Just keep voting.
Okay, so
Give it a good press. Keep voting. Maybe a few arguments going on if there's only one vote, one clicker between the two of you. But win that argument and make your vote. Keep voting. There should be more. Give it a good press. Okay, a couple minutes more. We should be getting up to over 100 here in terms of clickers. Okay. It's obviously not an entirely representative vote, but let's see what the state of play is before we begin the debate. Wow. Okay. So just over 50% of you have voted, 53% of you have voted and agree with the proposition that it's time for Scotland to become an independent nation state. There's 33% of you, roughly a third, in fact a third of you, who disagree with that statement. And there's 15% of you who don't know. Okay? Let's come back to this vote once we've heard what our speakers have to say. So our first speaker I'm going to invite to take the podium is Shona Robeson, MSP, and she's going to make a 5-minute argument from the perspective of the Scottish National Party that it is time for Scotland to become an independent nation state. So over to Shona Robeson.
Well, good afternoon everyone, and I hope you're enjoying your first few days at university. It's a few sleeps since I was there, but it's a great opportunity and I hope you enjoy it. Despite what Wallace has just said, in many ways this campaign isn't about political parties and isn't about politicians. It's actually about you, the people of Scotland, deciding the future of your nation. And it's a very special thing because not many countries get to decide the future of their country in a completely peaceful, democratic way. So it's something very special. And the thing that's amazed me the most about it has been how so many people who have not been involved in politics, have been pretty disengaged from politics, have got involved in this campaign. People from all walks of life. And that's reflected in the city of Dundee, the fact that 7,000 people have registered to vote who weren't on the register before, who for whatever reason didn't feel it was worthwhile voting in general elections and Scottish elections even. But for this election, for this decision about the future of their country, 7,000 people have put themselves either on the register for the first time or back on the register. And I think that tells us something very important, that people are really engaged with this campaign. It's very energising. It's very energising for us as politicians and very exciting, but something very, very special. And of course, you will be part of that decision, this historic decision in 10 days' time. More and more people are becoming yes, as the momentum in the polls show, as perhaps the momentum in the poll we've just had shows. I don't know where some of you were a year ago, but I've certainly spoken to many people who a year ago perhaps were either undecided or in fact some were no. But over the course of that time, because of the positive nature of the argument that the Yes campaign have made, and people seeing the opportunity that our nation can be all it can be with independence, have come to the decision to vote yes on September the 18th. Scotland is absolutely a wealthy country. With independence will we be 14th in the OECD, which is, I suppose, the rich man's club, if you like, in terms of prosperity of nations. That's a higher GDP per head of population than Japan, than France, and indeed than the UK. And even without oil, the credit ratings agency Standard & Poor's said that an independent Scotland would qualify for the highest rating. So Scotland is a wealthy nation, and don't let anyone tell you that it's not. But I suppose it's what we do with that wealth, because too many people in Scotland don't benefit from that wealth. So I want independence and prosperity for a purpose, to make our country better, to make Scotland a fairer place to live for our children and our children's children to grow up in. I want a fairer Scotland with a benefit system that looks after those who are not able to work for whatever reason. A welfare system that's fair. We want to have job creating powers to prevent the 35,000 young people that leave Scotland every year to have to get a job elsewhere. We want them to be able to stay here in Scotland and work here and have the job creating powers to do that. We also want a Scotland that doesn't spend £100 billion on new nuclear weapons. We have nuclear weapons based in Scotland, and with independence we can get rid of those. We don't want to be part of spending £100 billion that the UK government wants to do to replace those nuclear weapons. I think we can spend £100 billion, or our share of £100 billion, on much better things than nuclear weapons, to use against who? We also have the opportunity to build a country that has universal childcare, that has the opportunity for so many people that perhaps don't have the opportunity that they have at the moment. And finally, there's a fundamental truth that decisions about Scotland are best made by the people who care about Scotland, and that's the people who live here in Scotland. No one else will care about Scotland more than you. And you can elect a government that you will always vote for. At the moment we get governments we don't vote for. With independence, you'll always get the government you vote for here in Scotland. And yes, of course there'll be challenges. No one's saying that the sky will be blue every day, that it will be the land of milk and honey, but it is an opportunity to make Scotland a better place for all of us to live in. And that's why I believe it's time that Scotland becomes an independent nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much from Shona Robeson. Just invite Alex Johnston to make the case against the proposition. Alex Johnston is going to argue that it is not time for Scotland to become an independent nation state.
I will certainly do that. There's an idea around that the Yes camp has the monopoly on passion. But it was passion that got me involved in politics. I was younger than you are today, when in the 1970s it looked very much as if the SNP were going to succeed and drive Scotland towards independence. I think I was 13 years old when I decided the time had come that I either give in to that concept or actually stand up and be counted. And I've been campaigning for the Union ever since. I believe that I was lucky to be born a citizen of a country that is one of the outstanding examples of how people could work together for the common good. I believe that the United Kingdom is the strongest social, political and economic union the world has ever seen. I believe that in its 307 years, Scotland has punched above its weight within that union and continues to benefit from the arrangement we've entered into. There are huge advantages in pooling resources so that we can share opportunity and risk. And that's what we do in the United Kingdom. It's what we do successfully, and it's made us the country we are. The Scottish National Party and their political allies have brought forward the proposition that Scotland should be an independent country. Well, first of all, I dispute the proposition, because what they are suggesting is not independence. Independence is something very different from what they're talking about. What they're suggesting is that Scotland should be separated off, that it should be isolated from many of the links that we currently have. And I don't believe that should be allowed to happen. But I want you to look seriously today at some of the risks that we may face if we decide to go our own way. The numbers that are banded around during this debate are quite often exaggerated. I've got some numbers I'd like to tell you about. These numbers come from a document called the Government Expenditure and Revenue Scotland Report. It's published every year by the Scottish Government, and it tells us clearly how much money we raise in tax here in Scotland and how much money we actually spend here in Scotland. And for the last full years for which we have figures, the year ending 31st of March 2013, these figures make stark reading. Scotland generated in tax revenue, including a full geographical share of North Sea oil, £53 billion. Our expenditure, taking into account UK, Scottish and local government expenditure, came to a total of £65 billion, a deficit of just over 12 billion. That's not uncommon. The average for the last 5 years is 10.8 billion. If you include the current year, which is likely to be no different, it means in the last 6 years we've borrowed approximately 64 billion. Since Alex Salmond became the First Minister of Scotland, we have a net fiscal deficit of £75 billion. An independent Scotland will have to deal with that problem. I've asked Alex Salmond more than once in First Minister's question exactly how that will be dealt with. And the question's always asked, will it be increased taxation, will it be reduced expenditure, or will it be more borrowing? The answer we get is probably a combination of all three. Cut to the chase. During this campaign, this SNP government have promised the earth. They've appeared to give the impression that they will increase welfare spending. They've appeared to give the indication that they will increase education spending. But yet, we have found it impossible to pin them down. And at a Welfare Reform Committee meeting within the last 6 weeks, Nicola Sturgeon, when questioned, said that welfare spending will rise not 1 penny above that which is currently committed. So we're in the unusual position that we know that Scotland will find it hard to make ends meet in its first days as an independent country. We know very clearly that it will be difficult to achieve any of the commitments that the current government appear to be making. I believe that we're being fed the wrong information. I believe we are being misled. And I believe that if we vote for an independent Scotland, that as of the 19th of September, many of us are in for a great disappointment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much from Alex Johnson. Patrick Harvey is going to argue it's time for Scotland to become an independent nation state from the perspective of the Green Party.
Thanks very much, and can I thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you. The first thing I'd like to say is I'm sorry. I want to offer an apology on behalf of my generation of politicians who have failed you so badly. If you're one of the younger people in the audience who's just starting out on your university career, just starting out on your adult life, let's look at the world we've given you. It's a world where an economic model that's been run for the benefit of the few, that's allowed people to hoard the wealth of society, very often stashing it away in tax havens. And remember, that's your wealth that's been taken from you. And at the same time, the majority of ordinary people are seeing a bigger drop in their living standards than has happened since the Victorian age. A society where we're seeing that chronic inequality grow wider during periods of economic growth and grow wider again during periods of recession. So the social and economic consequences of that will be felt in this community as in communities all over the country, with people seeing their big employers not paying their fair share of corporation tax, but paying their employees poverty wages and keeping them on 0 hours contracts. Where we're seeing people pushed ever deeper into poverty as the welfare state is destroyed around us. We no longer have a welfare state in this country. We've got a benefit system which is not designed around human welfare. It's designed to bully people into low-paid work and subsidise that low pay for the big employers' benefit. And as for those who can't work or who can't find work, they will take the hindmost. And we know that hundreds of thousands of people are being pushed deeper into poverty as a result of the destruction of the welfare state, turned into a humiliation state. We're seeing the brink of an ecological crisis that people in Scotland are feeling, people around the world are feeling, partly as a result of that neoliberal economic model that's been run not in your benefit, but in the benefit of the few. My generation of politicians and those who came before us have brought this world to you. One which has social, economic and ecological challenges which your generation is going to have to step up to. I want to think about the generation of people after the Second World War for a moment, because we're very often told that we're better together because of what was achieved together. We're stronger because we pool and share resources. We don't. The resources are pooled, sure, but they're not shared fairly. And as for what was achieved after the Second World War, when a generation of people who had fought together, survived together, decided to rebuild together, yes, what an amazing legacy. And the only thing that should exceed our pride at the building of a national health service and a welfare state to be proud of is our anger at seeing that legacy torn to pieces by a UK government, actually successive UK governments, that are obsessed with a private, profit-driven model of healthcare, and are going further now and faster now at privatising the National Health Service south of the border. We so far have the ability to protect it. So long as we control Scotland's finances in the future, we'll be able to maintain that protection. But successive governments that have been pulling down that legacy, our anger at that needs to be directed into something positive. I think the same anger at a broken political system exists south of the border as well, and all too often it's being channeled into something mean-spirited, nasty and destructive, where people are offered a solution that says, resent this, blame that, hate those people. Scotland, I think, is lucky in that we have something positive and constructive to channel our legitimate anger at a broken political system into, and it's the opportunity to take responsibility for ourselves, to do something even more amazing than the generation after the Second World War achieved, and build a legacy that future generations will be proud enough to fight for and protect and be grateful that we managed to achieve it. There is one argument, though, one argument that might have me voting no, because I'm not a nationalist and I don't think about flags or identity, and my party doesn't either when we look at how to reach this decision. Most of us in the Green Party, including the Green Party of England and Wales, will be voting yes. The Green Party of England and Wales don't have a vote, of course, but most of them support a yes vote because they see the opportunity for a catalyst for the kind of democratic renewal that the rest of these islands have been waiting for a long time as well. If I thought this was a selfish act, if I thought that Scottish independence was in our interests but would harm our neighbours, or as Alex Johnson has argued, would break the bonds of friendship and family that I feel as well with our neighbours south of the border, I might be voting no. But I think Scottish independence is just the shot in the arm that the UK needs. It could catalyse democratic renewal across the rest of the UK. It could tip the balance against the renewal of nuclear weapons across the rest of the UK. They don't need them, they can't afford them. There are far better things to be spending that money on, a far more positive contribution to be made to peace in the world. And if Scotland harnesses its renewable resources instead of pursuing the UK's policy of another generation of nuclear power, then we'll have the opportunity to export clean renewable energy to benefit our neighbours as well. Scotland has got the chance to do something fantastic for Scotland, but I think something fantastic for our neighbours as well, and build the kind of constructive, friendly relationship of equals that we see between the Scandinavian countries. That could be the future of the relationship between the nations and regions of these islands, and that's why I think you should vote yes.
Thank you very much to Patrick Harvey for that. Just invite Jenny Mara to make the case from the perspective of the Labour Party why it is not time for Scotland to become an independent nation state.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to the University of Abertay this afternoon. I can't disagree with a lot of what Patrick Harvey said, because Patrick and I share many, I think, of the same values about how our country should be socially progressive, environmentally green, fair, equal and just. But I think the key difference in this debate, and it's one that I've felt for 2 or 3 years now throughout this debate, is that I always feel that the debate about powers and where power lies often comes in the absence of ideas and the will and the drive to take these things forward. And it brings me back to the question we have been faced with today, and it reminds me of actually sitting in an exam. I think the trick is in an exam to pull the question apart, and I think Wallace McNeish has actually hit the nail on the head, because how he describes this debate in your question today, the nation state, is it time for Scotland to become an independent nation state? that concept of nation state actually takes us way back. It takes us not way back even within this century or the century before. The concept of independent nation states is a 19th century concept. It takes us way back before the unification of Germany and Italy. It is an outdated concept, and most of you, more than me, have grown up in a world where borders are down, where people are interdependent, where people live in a world of technology that breaks barriers down rather than puts barriers up. And that's why I've not been surprised that in all the school debates around this country, that most of the young people voting have actually been in favour of remaining within the United Kingdom with increased powers for the Scottish Parliament and a vision for the future. And I believe this very strongly because, to go back in history again, about 100 years ago in this city of Dundee, the industrial landscape was dominated by jute mills. And my great-grandfather was a worker in one of those jute mills and set up the jute workers' union here in this city to get better working conditions for the jute workers. And believe me, up until recently, they worked in horrific conditions in the mills in Dundee. But he didn't do that by proposing to separate Dundee from Scotland, from the UK. He did that, as all progressive movements have done, by winning the argument and joining hands with his brothers and sisters, with his comrades and with his fellow workers in the mills of Lancashire and Lanarkshire, across Scotland and across the United Kingdom. And I firmly believe, I reject the policies of austerity as much as Shona and Patrick, but I firmly believe that social progress comes where masses of people join together and win the argument. And Labour has done that over the years. We set up the NHS that has become such a totem in this debate. We set it up, and we are the only country in this world with a health service that is free at the point of delivery with no insurance to back it up. We set up the Equal Pay Act of 1970, a socially progressive movement, and in the face of massive opposition from business and the failure of the supposedly progressive parties like the SNP to even turn up and vote for this, we marched through the lobbies in the House of Commons to set up the minimum wage, which has also become a totem of this debate. I believe that the future, like Shona said, is in your hands, but I believe this should not be a debate about powers. It should be a debate about people and your will to drive good ideas forward. I think we have the security of a very stable democracy to have those arguments. And the final thing I would say, I think there is an element in this debate, and I know that some of you are going on to study politics, and when you do, you will look at the paradigms of politics, and you might come back to this debate. But one of the paradigms, one of the models of politics you will learn about is core and periphery. And Alex Salmond at the moment is continuing the same type of argument that Nigel Farage is continuing in London. He blames Brussels. There is always a point the finger and blame culture. Alex Salmond is doing exactly the same, pointing the finger and blaming London, when actually he has a wealth of power within the Scottish Parliament to change our communities. I would hope that you might support the opposition this afternoon, and I look forward to the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much from Jenny Marrett. We're going to move now to a part of the debate where our speakers are going to criticise and critique what they've heard from the opposite side. So I'm going to ask Shona Robeson to speak just shortly, 3 or 4 minutes, and give us a critical perspective on what she's heard from the Better Together side. Thank you, Shona.
Alec Johnson spent more time talking about the SNP than he did about the positive case for the union. I'm sure there's a positive case to be made for the union, but we never hear it because it's all about what we can't do. I met a group of women yesterday who were undecided. I met a woman within that group who had been an absolutely hard no a year ago and had now become undecided, moving to yes. And the reason for that was what she described as the wall of noise from the No campaign, the constant negativity and the constant telling her what she can't do. And she was fed up with it. And we heard from Alex Johnson the same today. It was all about the SNP and all about the Yes campaign. Alex Johnson said that Scotland was too poor to be independent. I cited in my opening remarks the fact that Scotland would be the 14th wealthiest country, richer per head than Japan, France, the UK. Over the last 33 years, we have generated more tax per head than the UK for every one of those years. And in the last 5 years, our public finances have been healthier than the UK's by 8.3 billion. That's nearly £1,600 per head. So don't let anyone tell you we can't afford to be independent. And if it's about debt and deficit, my goodness, the UK has a deficit of £1 trillion. On that basis, the UK better give up its independence tomorrow, because it clearly can't afford to be independent. Scotland can be independent. We have the wealth to be independent. Alex Johnson also talked about Scotland becoming isolated. Not at all. We want to continue to be a good member of the EU, to be a good global nation, to have a good social union with our neighbours. I was born in England. My family, a lot of them live down in the Manchester area. Those social bonds will continue. What we want is political independence, to be able to make our own decisions here. And yes, to say to Jenny Mara, those bonds about social progression don't just stop at the border of the UK. They go across Europe and the globe. We don't need to be part of the UK to care about what happens to workers in other countries. And as far as the NHS goes, the best way to protect the NHS is with a yes vote, because if you look at what's happening to the NHS down south, with the privatisation of the NHS, at some point with the reduction of public funding to the NHS in England, that's going to have a direct impact on the NHS here in Scotland because of the Barnett formula and the way the NHS is funded. So the best way to protect the funding for the NHS in Scotland is to vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much from Shona Robeson. Alex Johnson, response to the arguments that you've heard so far from the Yes Scotland side.
I can understand why people in favour of a yes vote are optimistic. I like to be optimistic as well. I, for example, stand to represent a party who, when we celebrated 50 years of the National Health Service, had been in charge of it for 35 out of these 50 years, and yet it was something to be celebrated. But the reason why the health service is a success is that it is well funded and well managed. The idea that it would be better if we could give it more money is one which is simplistic and, unfortunately, opens up an opportunity to misrepresent the case that is being made. I believe we are better together, and I believe one of the reasons we're better together is our health service. Now, if you listen to what's being said, you'll hear it suggested that somehow the National Health Service is being privatised. Well, if you look at what's happening in the NHS, taxpayers' money is being used to provide treatment which is free at the point of delivery. It has to be acknowledged that in many cases, that resource is being used by private companies to provide efficient treatment. If you go to your GP, the chances are you're visiting a private contractor to the National Health Service. If you go to your dentist, the chances are you're visiting a private contractor to the health service. If you get a prescription for a drug, you will go to a chemist shop, which is a private contractor to the health service. You will receive drugs that are developed by multinational drug companies, which are private contractors to the health service. If you receive treatment in hospital for an injury or an accident for which there was insurance cover, including a road accident, the NHS will recover that cost from an insurance company. That is a private operation. The fact is that our NHS is a mixing, a merging of all the talents. It brings together all the skills we have, and it ensures that every person in this country has access to the best of service, whether public or private in provision. Alex Salmond talks in his Socialist Utopia, Future Scotland, about something which he describes not as a national health service, but as a public health service. Something which will be publicly owned and provide service that will be dictated by ministerial decree. I propose that what Alex Salmond is suggesting for Scotland's health service after independence is divisive. It takes away the opportunity for individuals to access the best of treatment regardless of who or how it was provided. And there's one example of the hypocrisy of the current SNP government with their proposals when you look at what they themselves have done to buy in private contractors to the health service. The last full year for which we have figures, £85 million was spent in sending NHS patients to private hospitals, £400 million during the course of this SNP government. We believe that Scotland's resources need to be used for the benefit of all, not for some ideological political objective, but actually to provide the best of service for each and every one of us. That's why I believe that we belong as part of the United Kingdom with its long traditions and not as part of some northern British experiment that will hive Scotland off in the hope that we might be able to apply outmoded political objectives and achieve something different from the disaster they achieved before. It's not what I want. I don't want to see Scotland independent. I want to see Britain continue and its institutions work for our benefit. That's why I believe we're better together and that we should all go and vote no on the 18th of September.
Thank you very much from Alex Johnson. Patrick Harvey, please respond to the arguments that you've heard from Better Together.
Thank you. Very briefly on the health service, because it can sometimes be a distraction thinking about the different policies north and south of the border. But there is a fundamental difference between spending about a penny in every pound through the private sector to fill in the gaps in provision. I'd love it if we could do that all through the public sector. But there's a fundamental difference between doing that at that scale and privatising the basic structure of the National Health Service, which is being done south of the border, having the thing driven by the profit motive. Yes, of course, GPs have always been part of the private sector within the health service, but it's the public sector and the government that decides on how they're regulated and how they're paid. They're not allowed to charge for their services. Yes, of course, the drug companies very often keep the world held over a barrel, but their copyright, their intellectual and patents, their intellectual property, that is a state-protected monopoly, which we could do a lot better at holding to account and ensuring that those businesses work for the public good rather than just for the interests of their shareholders. On can we afford it? One of the arguments that was central to Alex Johnson's opening comments, can we afford it? Well, this comes down to two basic possibilities, and I suspect both governments are able to use honest facts to present them in a different way to tell the story they would like to tell. The facts of our public finances are complex enough that each side can pick the facts that it likes and present them in a favourable light. But the basic choices are these. Either Scotland's economy is doing pretty rubbish under the current UK government. Either the UK and the Union have served us very poorly in leaving us with an economy that makes us the only Northern European country unable to afford to run our own affairs, in which case there's a principled reason for getting out, or we can afford it, and the Scottish Government is right and we'd be the 14th richest country in the world. So why not? Finally, on the question of solidarity, which came up, and I recognise, as Jenny said, that I have a great deal of common interest, common ground with progressive voices within the Labour Party, for example, and other parts of the political spectrum. And when the Greens debate independence, as we have done over many years, we don't talk about isolation. We immediately go on from our disagreements. You know, we're happy to acknowledge we've got people on both sides of the independence debate within the Green Party. It's probably something like 4-1 in favour of a yes vote. But we then entirely fail to fall out about it. And we do go on to talk about interdependence. and how Scotland would take its position in the world, in the community of countries around the world, and make a positive contribution globally. This is not about isolation. This is absolutely about taking your place on the world stage proudly and making a contribution, having a cooperative and friendly relationship with your neighbours. But the alternative, how do we get that kind of economic change, that political change that the country requires? How do we express those values of solidarity within the current UK political framework? Well, we tried it once, chuck the Tories out, bring in a Labour government, and look at what we got. The beginnings of privatisation in the National Health Service, the beginnings of the erosion of the welfare state and using welfare to subsidise low pay. The progressives within the Labour Party lost the debate at the time. And what we got was something middle of the road, mainstream, basically trying to ensure that you were all reaching accommodation with this evil neoliberal economic model, not trying to challenge it. Well, I'm sorry, but the progressives in the Labour Party have just lost that debate again. And Ed Balls has committed to following Tory spending plans, and they voted for the welfare cap, and a dozen other examples as well. The UK Parliament is never going to see any party form a majority in the 2015 election, or the one after that, or the one after that, without that party tacking right. I just don't think it's a viable option. I wish it was, and I think, and I would come back to this final point, if Scotland votes for independence and forms a better relationship, inspires the kind of political change in Northern England, in many of the communities that want to assert their own interests against the interests of the City of London, I think that's the catalyst that could change UK politics for the better as well. This is not just about us. This is not about walking away. Scotland's going nowhere except forward and making a better contribution to the world, expressing our own values with our neighbours on a friendly basis and on the world stage as well.
Thank you very much to Patrick Harvey. Jenny Mara, time for your critique of Yes Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Wallace. I'd like to touch on 2 or 3 issues that have been raised by the proposition, but let me first of all put in my tuppence worth on the NHS. When a Labour government was elected in 1997, it was part of our manifesto to devolve power, to have on the principle of subsidiarity, which is one of the founding principles of the European Union, that powers are delegated to the most appropriate levels. And so we held the referendum within a few months, not over 2 years, to establish the Scottish Parliament. We won an overwhelming majority and we established the Scottish Parliament. And one of the powers that the Scottish Parliament has is full control over health. And I would underline that. We have full control over health decisions in Scotland. So if there were ever any proposition to privatise any part of our health service, they would be decided in the Scottish Parliament. And I can tell you, and I'm sure Patrick and Shona would both agree with me, that there is currently no consensus for privatisation within the Scottish Parliament. I think Alex Johnson's party might be in favour of some, but they only hold 15 seats. The Labour Party is not in favour of privatisation of our health services. I believe the SNP is not in favour, although they have privatised some, and I believe that Patrick Harvey is not in favour either. That is a large majority in our Parliament. So it is inconceivable that a decision on that would be taken. To my mind, the greater and more obvious threat to our health service is the £6 billion black hole that independent financial experts have said will be left if Scotland leaves the United Kingdom. There are going to be spending challenges. That is one of the figures that has been given by the experts. And what upsets me about this debate is always when there are spending challenges, it is people at the bottom who suffer. So people in our communities who rely on a lot of health services, who rely on a lot of public services, will be most affected by the cuts that will have to come. And so many financial experts have said that the Salix Salmon sums just don't add up for this proposition. They don't add up. There would either have to be tax rises or there would have to be public spending cuts. So I see that as the biggest threat to our NHS, and I say that as somebody who is so proud of the NHS. My party established the NHS, one of the greatest achievements, I think, of my party and this country. The second thing I would like to touch on is nuclear weapons, and I think Shona touched on this in her opening speech. I've always been against nuclear weapons, and I've been outside Faz Lane to say so. But I do not believe that the independence proposition is the way to rid our world of nuclear weapons. My politics don't take me to a place where I would rather just move them down the road to somewhere in England. My politics take me to a place that in what we did when we were in government. When Labour was elected to government, it joined hands with countries around the world, with Russia, with America, with others, and managed to reduce nuclear stockpiles in this world. The independence proposal does nothing to make our world safer from nuclear weapons. It proposes that Trident be moved somewhere down the road, and it's just, as long as it's not in Scotland, it's okay. I'm afraid that is not where I stand for. I see that as the politics of pure nationalism, and I can't agree with that. I would rather work hand in hand with international colleagues to reduce nuclear weapons and get rid of them from our world. This is what we did when we were in government, and a future government would, a Labour government in London and across the United Kingdom would do the same. I think it's very interesting as well, and I think this is Wallace McNeish raised this point at the start of the debate. You will know, if you've been following the debate. Actually, I knocked on somebody's door yesterday in Lochee who didn't know there was a referendum on. Can you believe that? I nearly fell over. I couldn't quite believe it. But if you've been following this debate in the media, you will know that our campaign has been accused of negativity. And what I would say to you on that is, when anyone, and this is exactly what Wallace is doing today, when anyone has a proposition, as the Yes Scotland campaign does, it is the job of the people opposing that campaign to ask questions and to pull their argument apart. And we have been accused of scaremongering and negativity on the currency. Now, the currency is one of the most important things in our country. It underpins our economy. But given the opportunity today to put forward the case for an independent Scotland and how our economy would work, you will note that neither of the Yes Scotland speakers have taken the opportunity to address that fundamentally important issue of the currency. Given the opportunity to do that, they have failed to do that. I would ask you to ask yourself serious questions about the future of this country, how you want it to be, your role in it in driving it forward, but to also test the proposition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Jenny Mara. We're going to move now to the audience interaction part of our debate. Kevin and Roddy are going to be roaming around with mics. We also have some written questions from students. Are there any immediate responses to what you've heard from our politicians? Has anybody got a perspective? Or anybody? There's a student there with his hand up, Roddy, just down there on your right.
One thing that I would have to really take issue with is what Jenny Marr said, comparing Alex Salmond to Nigel Farage. That's something that has to be... Nigel Farage is... Well, his argument is 100% nonsense and could be argued to be racist. Alex Salmond is not a racist on any level. This debate has been done on the basis of civic nationalism. Also, as I said, Farage's argument is nonsense. There's no nonsense about Westminster's 2 illegal wars in the Middle East and over 30 years of wasting Scottish oil revenues. So to compare Salmond to Farage and his argument is absolute nonsense.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you might be a yes voter somehow. Is there anybody from the other side? Student up the back here.
Yeah, I've got a few points of view actually. This is a question for Jenny Mara. I don't want nuclear weapons in England, but there was a report a couple of years ago that said the collateral damage if they were moved to England would be too great. So basically what they said was it's fine for them to be in Scotland, but they can't be moved to England in case an accident happened. That shows you what Westminster thinks of us. They don't give a damn about us at all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think you might be a yes voter as well. Are there any no? Is there any no's here? Who want to express a no? There's a student there, behind you there, Roddy.
So, do you consider that Royal Bank of Scotland has fully recovered the economic crisis, and how do you comment that England funds the bank when it has its financing problems?
Could you just say it very slowly? Sorry, I'm not getting your...
I still have a language issue. So, do you consider that Royal Bank of Scotland has fully recovered of the economic crisis?
Okay, an issue about the bank, about Scottish banks and the Royal Bank of Scotland. Okay, we'll come back to the currency, and we'll come back to the Scottish financial system. Thanks for that question. We will come back to that. Is that just perspectives at the moment we're looking for before we move to actual questions? Perspectives? No? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, there's a student down here. One of you's going to have to run down. Thank you.
Hiya. I am a no voter, but I am very fair on both perspectives. I very much think that you all put across an excellent form of argument. But what worries me the most, I would say, is that this is kind of becoming into more. The yes vote tends to talk a lot about how better together tends to be scaremongering, often in mildly threatening behaviour. I'm actually finding it from more the yes side now, because I feel like the no vote is now a wrong answer, so to speak. And that's causing me quite a lot of concern, because I feel like I don't actually have an opinion anymore. I'm not allowed an opinion.
Okay, so you're a wee bit worried just about maybe the way in which the debate has been conducted over the last few weeks. Okay, thank you very much. Is there any last... There's one student here, Roddy, and then we're going to go to written questions, but you get the last say in this, just perspectives and responses.
Hiya, I'm an EU student from Sweden, so speaking of the Scandinavian countries. I came into Scotland with a very neutral vote, and I have, by following the news and so on over the weeks and the months, leaned more towards yes, because I can't see a good argument from the no side. There's talk about the currency, for example. As far as I know, England does not own the pound. Anyone can use the pound.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Listen, thank you very much for that. And I'm going to. There's been a number of perspectives on the currency, and Jenny Mara raised it. So we've got a written question on the currency. I think Louise Macaulay, is she here? Is Louise here? I think she's got a question on the currency that kind of ties into the whole currency issue. Thank you. And I think you're a fourth year sociology student, yes?
Yeah, that's correct. My question on the currency is we've been given a range of options on the proposed currency, and I think this is more directed at SNP. So if we gain independence, how long is it until we actually know what the currency is going to be?
Okay, Shona Robertson, how long is it? If we get independence, when will we know what currency we're going to have?
Well, the currency will be the pound, because no one can stop us using the pound. It's an international tradable currency. The debate is around whether or not there'll be a formal currency union. Now, on the 19th of September, that's not when we become independent. We become independent in 2016, in March 2016. And what we would seek to do is to have positive discussions with the UK government, who we believe will come to a sensible decision that a currency union is in all of our interests. Why do I think that? Well, I think that because if they don't, then George Osborne, as the Chancellor, is going to have to explain to the good taxpayers of England, Wales and Northern Ireland why with the offer made by Scotland to take on our share of the debt, which would equate to about 100 billion, servicing that about 5 billion a year, why he doesn't want us to do that and instead wants the people of England, Wales and Northern Ireland to keep all that debt to themselves. For us, that doesn't make any sense, and I don't think it makes any political sense for him either. So that's why we're very confident there will be a currency union. But in terms of the pound, no one can stop us using the pound. It is a tradable international currency, and it's the pound that we will have. But we are very confident that that pound will sit and be used within a formal currency union.
Thank you. Alex Johnson, you want to come in?
It is absolutely true that an independent Scotland can use the pound if it likes and can use any currency it wants to. The problem is that if it's not part of a currency union, then it has no lender of last resort, no central bank, so major decisions that are being made in relation to currency will be made in London by the Policy Committee of the Bank of England or by the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the rest of the United Kingdom, whoever he might be. So one of the key reasons for being independent, the idea that the Scottish Finance Minister would have more of the levers of power to manipulate or change direction of the economy, simply would not exist unless a currency union existed. The currency union will not exist, and the reason is a simple one. It's public opinion and it's political pressure. The people of the United Kingdom have passed through the phase of being steered towards a single European currency. They rejected it, and they've been proved right to have rejected it. The additional costs of currency transactions as a result of not being part of the euro have been massively outweighed by the opportunity that afforded us by having our own currency and being able to manage that. Politically, people in the south are wedded to the pound. It will influence their decision making. And the reason why there will be no currency union is that there's a general election in May of next year, and whichever political party promises a currency union with Scotland will lose that general election. So there will be no currency union, and it will be based on votes cast on the ballot box.
Patrick Harvey?
Can I try and link the questions? First of all, I wanted this question at the front to be addressed and not to be ignored, because I hope that anybody, whatever view they have of the referendum, feels that their view is respected. I respect my colleagues on the other side of this debate here. I even respect Alex Johnson. He does his best sometimes to make it hard for me to do so, but I manage it. And my own party, as I said, has a range of views. We debate it in a spirit of friendship, and that spirit is something that Scotland is capable of. That's the kind of debate Scotland deserves. And let's just imagine that we had a result of, let's say, 52% for a yes vote. I don't want to build the kind of Scotland where 48% of people don't feel welcome or don't feel that they want to be there. I think this debate needs to be one that's inclusive. And the way this links to the currency question, in my view, is that all of us have accepted, by having this referendum, that we're going to accept the decision of the Scottish people. We've all decided that Parliament can't resolve this, political parties can't resolve this, it's you, the electorate, who have to resolve this, and we all have to accept the result. And what that means is that the negotiation which comes afterwards will begin with one side taking this stance and another side taking that stance, and then they get around the table and they start discussing. This is the way it happens. If it was possible for the two governments to have sat down a year and a half ago and pre-negotiated how the transition to whichever currency outcome was preferred, how that transition would happen, because any currency option is going to result in cooperation, negotiation and compromise to transition to that new option. If it was possible to do that pre-negotiation, then we would all have crystal clarity. But the UK government wasn't willing to, or they said that the Scottish government applied too many conditions to that, so whichever side you believe in there, that pre-negotiation didn't or couldn't or wouldn't happen. So we have to make this decision knowing that there are a range of options. I think, personally, a Scottish pound is a perfectly viable option, a more attractive option. It would give us the kind of economic flexibility to make big macroeconomic choices for ourselves. Our friend a moment ago spoke from Sweden, knows that you've got three countries in that neck of the woods, Sweden, Norway and Denmark. who each have a krona. It's not the same krona, but the currencies and the economies don't diverge hugely. They're able to cooperate and work together to a certain extent. And that's the kind of relationship that I think Scotland could have, beginning with a Scottish pound that's pegged very closely to sterling, and we only choose to separate it as and when conditions are right. As and when we judge conditions are right, not as and when a UK Chancellor judges conditions are right. So that's the kind of option that I would like to see pursued. And finally, on the banks, because this is crucial to trust in the economy as well. It's not just that the Bank of England was nationalised by all of us and we all have a stake in it. It's not just that its reserves were built up and the public deficit was built up, debt was built up by all of us and a fair share of assets and liabilities. It's also about how we choose to regulate the wider commercial banks. Money supply in this country is controlled by the commercial banks. It's not controlled by government anymore. The regulation of banking and financial services has resulted in this incredible domination by a tiny number of mega banks. And as for the UK government's approach to banking reform, it boils down to let's just throw in another mega bank into the mix. We could be adopting the kind of model that many other European countries do see, where you have a rich diversity of small banks, local banks, municipal banks, co-ops and credit unions, as well as some larger commercial banks. But the big commercial ones don't crowd out the whole market. That's the kind of financial services sector which would be more resilient against financial shocks, more directed to investment in the real economy, in things that create jobs, instead of gambling on the casino economy, and more likely to ensure that our economy does share resources fairly amongst the people in a way that benefits all of us.
Thank you very much, Patrick Harvey. Jenny Mara, how do you respond?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has been covered. I'm keen to leave more time for more questions, but I would like to touch on one thing, and that's the issue of pre-negotiation. You know, Patrick was putting forward the idea that we should have pre-negotiated a lot of the things that would happen in the event of an independent Scotland, and Shona was nodding as he was saying that. I actually think that is fundamentally anti-democratic, to have this idea of pre-negotiating a supposed result before the people have their say. And that is why we're in the position we're in, because people in Scotland have got to decide themselves first if we want this country to separate, before the SNP government start talking to British ministers and saying how would this work, how would that not work. That is fundamentally anti-democratic. You and we must have our decision first before any of that happens. I just feel it's an important point to make.
To be fair, I was really intending to explain why it didn't happen rather than to say that it should have done. But here's where we are, that's all.
Okay. Thank you. Louise, have you any response to that? To what you've heard?
I'm just going to leave it there.
Okay, thank you, Louise. Are there any other students here who feel that they've got a response to the whole issue of the pounds and the issue of the currency? Student at the back? Oh, not. Okay, very, very quickly.
Yeah, this is just a quick question. A lot of people in the Better Together campaign purely believe that what the SNP say will happen will definitely happen. In 2016, if we get independence, we will elect a new government and then we'll make decisions for ourselves. But the Better Together campaign purely believe that what the SNP are saying will definitely happen. We'll do what we want after we get independence. Don't purely believe that the SNP
that's because the intention of the SNP government is to complete the negotiations and declare their independence prior to the 2016 election. Alex Salmond will be in a position to have whatever control he wants over whatever direction we take, and it could be set in stone in his constitution before he submits to a public referendum on it.
Okay. Thank you very much for those responses. I mean, I think this is a question about, in this whole area, really about the way in which the Yes campaign has been associated with the Scottish National Party only. And, you know, there has been. Would you like to respond to that?
I actually think some people in the Better Together campaign have got a bit of an unhealthy obsession with Alex Salmond, I have to say. You know, it isn't about Alex Salmond, it's not about the SNP at all. It's about the future of your country. You know, you will decide when the first elections in an independent Scotland to form the government in May 2016, it will be your choice. You can elect Jenny's party, you can elect Alex's party, Patrick's party, or my party, or new parties. You know, that's what it's about. It's about democracy. You'll decide who the future government of this country is.
Does a student want to come in here?
Hello. Oh, hello. Basically, I heard about the central bank, about how we're going to share it with England. What is the problem about setting up your own central bank for a new country? The last I heard, the central bank in England is owned by its own shareholders that are not allowed to be disclosed to the public. So, if we set up our own central bank, if we voted yes, would we be allowed to know who they are?
Okay, well, the reason that we proposed a currency union as being the best solution is that the Fiscal Commission, which is independent, looked at all the different options and basically said the best option for Scotland is a currency union. The Bank of England is independent from government. It became so under Gordon Brown, one of the better things he did actually. But of course, it is also true what Patrick said is an asset that we have all contributed to, and therefore when it comes to the discussion about assets and liabilities, I don't think it's unreasonable for Scotland to say that we have a share in the Bank of England, all those assets that have been built up, as well as being willing to take on the liabilities. But assets and liabilities go together. But that's our best option, because we think that's the best option for Scotland. Absolutely. And that's why we are pursuing it.
Agree entirely.
Okay.
Currency union is the best option for Scotland. We've had one for 307 years. Let's keep it.
Okay. I'd like
political control.
Okay, there's one student up there, just up at the back, and we'll just hear your perspective. Then I want to move on to another question. Okay, and I want to move away from the currency.
I was going to ask a question, if that's okay.
Okay. If it's a different question,
it is a different question.
Okay, that's
moving
good.
on from currency. Quite generally, I'd just like to give unionists a chance to talk about something progressive, because it seems to me that a lot of the arguments are based very much on the fundamentals of how the union was built. You know, we heard people talk about after the war. We heard people talk about the devolution in '97 and stuff like that. But I'd like to hear what is a progressive reason why the union is stronger moving forward, not just based on the fundamentals of how it's worked before.
Okay, Jenny Mara, can you come in on that?
Absolutely, yes. My first priority in terms of a progressive policy would be to eradicate youth employment in Scotland. It is currently 18.6% and it's 3 times the general rate of unemployment. And I believe with the policies that we have proposed in London, Ed Miliband's youth guarantee, coupled with the borrowing powers that are already in the Scottish Parliament, 2 billion that will come into train next year, and devolving the work programme to Scotland, I believe that we can put policies in place and have the drive and determination to eradicate youth employment. In contrast, the Scottish Government's position at the moment is to reduce youth employment in our communities by 40% by 2020. I don't think that's nearly ambitious enough. If that is their target for an independent Scotland, quite frankly, I don't think it's progressive enough. I don't think it's ambitious enough. I would like it to come down to the general rate and eradicate it altogether.
Thank you. Patrick Harvey, is there anything progressive about the union?
Well, let's imagine there was a no vote. My party's mission, my party's core reason for existing wouldn't change in either a yes or a no scenario. We exist to try and challenge the growth-obsessed, selfish, deregulated, market-obsessed economic model that's brought us to the social, economic and ecological crises I spoke about at the beginning. I would find it, I would find it pretty difficult in the short term to see how we can activate that, because I do see an opposition at Westminster that contains many people that I've got time for, that I've got respect for, but it also contains many people who just want to strike that deal again, that deal that says let's reach an accommodation with neoliberalism, let's try and manage it a wee bit better rather than trying to challenge it. And that's why you get some of the same rightward-leaning policies from the two major parties at Westminster when they come into government, regardless of what they said in opposition. I don't want to pretend that there are no progressive people on the no side of this debate. That would be absurd. There are people who are progressive and with whom I share many values who are on the no side. I disagree with their conclusion. I don't think that either a yes or a no vote is a magic wand that solves every problem or would lead to a disaster. I think both a yes and a no vote are a balance between risks and opportunities. There are risks and opportunities with either. My judgment is that there are more opportunities than risks by voting yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick Harvey. I want to move on to an issue that's probably quite close to your hearts here as students. We've got a question from Catherine Law. Is there Catherine Law here? This is Catherine Law just down here, and she, I think, is a fourth-year sociology student, and she has a question for us. I think it's important to all of you as students.
I just wanted to start off saying, Alex, you called the SNP hypocrites, but I think Jenny Mara's Labour Party are the biggest hypocrites here, because they did start with the representing the working class, but it's them who sold out their core values to compete with the Tories for power down south. And in fact, in a recently televised debate, Jim Murphy couldn't guarantee free higher education in Scottish Labour's next manifesto, just after Nicola Sturgeon promised free tuition fees regardless of the referendum outcome. So I was wondering how each side would argue either independence or staying in the union would benefit young people, especially in regards to education, considering most students here at Abertay would be able to afford to attend uni if it wasn't free.
Okay, could I ask Jenny Mara just to respond to that, because it's quite directed at the Labour Party.
I got that. Yeah, Catherine, I think like with all these things, you've got to pick apart policies and their effect on our communities, and it has been evidenced that the current policy of free tuition as it stands, with no discretion, actually has not increased people from poorer backgrounds going to university at all. In fact, since it was abolished, there are less and less people from poorer backgrounds attending university. We have not yet put together our manifesto for 2016, but what I would hope that the Labour Party would be proposing in that as regards tuition fees is a very sophisticated model that actually gives students from the poorest backgrounds their tuition fees paid with generous grants and bursaries, actually a much better deal than they're getting now. But at the other end also allows private investment to come into universities, that the money that they desperately need. Now, the Labour government in 1992 in Australia introduced a very sophisticated model and looked at actually investing in courses and skills that the economy needs, and it allowed investment to come into universities, but it also provided excellent packages for people who couldn't afford themselves to get to university, and much more generous packages than we offer here. I think now that we've gone to 50% participation in education, which I think is a marvellous thing, we need to look at sophisticated public spending models and can't just have black and white policies. So that's the kind of thing I would be looking towards. The Australian model has never been challenged by any government. The Liberals, which is the equivalent of the Conservative government in Australia, has never had the gumption to challenge that model because it's seen as progressive and unchallengeable. And I think that's the kind of sophisticated public policy we should be making in this country.
Shona Robertson,
I think a sophisticated model that Jenny's talking about sounds to me like code for reintroducing tuition fees. That'll be an interesting manifesto commitment. We've made it very clear we don't believe that education should be based on anything other than the ability to learn, not the ability to pay. I was the first person in my family to get a university degree. I benefited from a free education, and what I don't want to see is us pulling the drawbridge up behind your generation and the generations to come that make you end up paying the type of 9,000 tuition fees that English students are having to pay. That absolutely sends would have sent a terror into my family. There's no way my family would have taken on debt, because my parents are very debt averse. So there's no way my family would have done that. And we know from the statistics down south that fees are putting off huge numbers of students coming in to the universities. But it's not just about higher education. One of the important things we've also done is to maintain the EMA, the Educational Maintenance Allowance. £55 million has been spent since 2011 on making sure that students can stay on at school to study, to get the qualifications, to get into college and university. They've actually abolished that in England, and I think that's a very retrograde step.
Thank you very much. Alex Johnson, what's your position on the funding of higher education?
Very briefly, I don't want to give the impression that everything the current government's doing is wrong. And some of the stuff that Shona mentioned there is vital to ensuring that people get the opportunity to go on and study. However, let's cut to the chase here. The solution that the SNP government came to in order to avoid tuition fees in Scotland was to slash the college budgets by 20% and temporarily give that money to the universities. I suspect that it was to get them past the referendum on the 18th of September. What Jenny was talking about is much more complex and much more difficult to achieve, but nevertheless equally vital. In a situation where half our young people or more are going forward into higher education, it's no longer acceptable to simply get your degree and think you've achieved something. We need to look at what the economy needs and steer our young people into the courses that we actually need them for purposes of the economy, but better still, where it will actually deliver a highly paid job at the end of the day. And we know that in Scotland we're desperately short of maths and science, engineers, that sort of skills, and we have perhaps too many people choosing to do other types of courses. Now, one of the ways to achieve that, we've heard Jenny describe how that can be achieved, but one of the ways to achieve that is to encourage companies who are currently struggling to find graduates in certain skills to finance, to support, to actually sponsor young people through university. So there's a huge opportunity there for the private sector to influence the marketplace, steer young people into the courses that will deliver well-paid employment, and that's another source of resource that we should be tapping much more effectively than we currently are.
Thank you very much. Patrick Harvey?
Well, I found that a chilling vision, personally. I suspect that the more enthusiastically Alex Johnson was nodding along to Jenny Mara's comments, I suspect the more uncomfortable Jenny became. The idea that people should, any people, whether they pass a means test or not, and that's what the sophisticated model seemed to boil down to, a means test. The idea that anybody should be told you can have a higher education, but you're going to end up 20, 30, 40,000 pounds in debt by the end of it. Before you've got your first house, before you've got your first job, before you've started a family, 20, 30, 40,000 pounds in debt, I think that's absurd. We've got too much comfort with the idea of people living with large amounts of personal debt. And we should be trying to reduce that, not find ways to increase it. The idea that we can tell people that yes, you can have a higher education, but only if KPMG thinks you're worthy of it, so that you can all be trained up to help their clients dodge their taxes in future, because that's good and productive for the economy. That's a bleak vision. And the idea that you can have a higher education, but only if your academic passion lies in something that we've decided is good for us, that's a bleak vision. I do recognise some of what was said about the college's budget. And this is one more example, a bit like the NHS, where having policy control is good, but sometimes not good enough. You need to be able to control your finances as well. Because when the UK government decided to take public funding out of universities by introducing and then cranking up tuition fees, that has a direct knock-on effect on the block grant. And the Scottish government any Scottish government, whether it was Shonna's party or anybody else in government at Holyrood, if you want to keep higher education free for exactly the same principled reasons that all education should be free. Why don't we charge wealthy people's children to go to school? We don't, because we're better off as a society when we pay for these things collectively rather than individually. If we want to do that, and the UK government's cutting Scotland's finances, then the money has to come from somewhere else. And I did vote against some of the SNP's budgets when the housing budget was cut, or the college's budget was cut. But I sympathised with their dilemma of wanting to maintain free higher education while seeing their budget cut. So having policy control is great, but ultimately we need to control Scotland's finances as well if we want the long-term future of all of these public services and other forms of public investment to be protected.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick Harvey. Are there any responses from the students in relation to that question? Any responses to what you've heard? The student up here? Is that? Okay, thank you. You're coming back on this one.
Yeah, it's education. I'm going to get involved. This is in regards to the idea of a reintroduction of tuition fees into Scotland. And yeah, I understand what the point is when you say that tuition fees don't work. Not that that's true. There is only the 20% most deprived students, not even students, 20% most deprived people in Scotland. There's only 11% of them that get into university, which is a tiny amount in regards to how it should actually represent it. But what it says is that does not mean that tuition fees don't work, even though they are equal to the percentage of the intake of England. What this actually means is, when you look into the facts and figures, is the education system's not working, and this is because the attainment levels in schools is below that of England. Now that is not something that tuition fees hinders. Now tuition fees, sorry, I'm really trying to get the word in here and it's not coming.
Okay.
Probably. What I was going, 2 seconds, I've actually completely forgot what I was going to say. A third of the income, 2 seconds, I haven't worded this. In England, 3 times the amount of money is spent on widening access, and this is to make up for the fact that more deprived students don't get into higher education. But that's not spent in Scotland, and we are still equal to that of England, of the intake. I don't know if this is making much sense to you.
So so the question is really, how do we get more people from deprived backgrounds, from the poorer sections of society into university? Yeah?
Yes, the question is as follows, it's not a problem of tuition fees, and I genuinely hate it. Yeah, we'll reintroduce tuition fees because the numbers would go down, they would just drastically decrease of deprived students coming to university. It's about encouraging deprived students or people from lower socio-economic backgrounds to get better attainment in schools, because that's the problem, it's not tuition fees.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you. Is there any other perspectives? On the whole question of the student here? Not spoken before? Yep.
Hi, I'm an international student. Sorry, wow, that's weird. International student, and I want to thank Scotland in general for welcoming me. I'm still looking forward to around 20,000 in debt when I'm done here. But if the tuition, if SAS wouldn't have paid for my education here, it wouldn't have been an option to come here. And what I'm hearing actually is that from the Better Together people is that I'm not welcome. I don't feel welcome the way that you're telling me that I have to pay more than it's actually viable to actually come and study here. You're missing out on a lot of international students who see Scotland as an opportunity. I wanted you to come to an international country where I could speak English, and going to the States is no, you can't do that. It's even a chance. And not even just going to London, it's way too expensive. Being from a poor family, I can't see anywhere else to go than to Scotland. And if it now turns out to be that the tuition fees change and I actually have to pay more, I'll have to leave. Okay. So I don't see the point.
So I suppose this is the question about EU students and their possible changing status in an independent Scotland, if that was to happen. Yeah. Maybe come back on that, Shona.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, on the lady who was talking about the widening access, I absolutely agree with her. Tuition fees are a different issue, and I think we agree that tuition fees are a bad thing. Widening access is important, and there's a lot of good work that's been done around access courses. Universities like this, Abertay, are very, very good at finding different ways and non-traditional ways of getting young people from more deprived backgrounds into university, and we should support that. The EMAs, as I spoke about earlier on, are really, really important because they can keep young people at school from 16, 17 and 18 to help them get qualifications. But I agree we need to do more on that. In terms of EU students, you're very welcome, and of course the good thing about having young people coming to study here is that hopefully many will stay and work here and pay tax into the system, because we need to grow our working age population. We'll do that partly by keeping young people living here in Scotland, and so that they can get jobs here and not leave, the 35,000 young people who leave every year, but also by attracting people who want to come and make a contribution to our country, and I think that's a very good thing. In terms of the future of the tuition fees, we are obviously very keen to take forward discussions with the EU about what we call objective justification. To cut a long story short, one of the concerns we would have, obviously, is the large numbers of English, Welsh and Northern Irish students who currently do pay fees to come and study here, who we would want to discuss with the EU about the continuation of some arrangement, because obviously in terms of numbers of students coming here, we want to make sure that Scottish students have the ability to study in further and higher education, and the places would be available for them. So those are discussions that we would be wanting to take forward with the EU at a very, very early stage after a yes vote.
Thank you very much, Shona. Jenny?
Yeah, just to pick up on the point Shona made, this is the bit of the argument, well, one of the bits of the independence argument I don't really understand, because Patrick and Shona have talked a lot this afternoon about the bonds of friendship and the bonds between Scotland and England and Wales that won't break in the event of a yes vote. And I just find it hard to accept that the SNP's position on this at the moment is that every other member state in the EU, the Scottish Government steps in and pays their tuition fees when they come to Scotland, as the gentleman explained. But when Scotland becomes independent, if there's a yes vote, they'll happily pay for every other EU member country's fees coming into Scotland, but they'll say no to England and Wales. So how do parents in Manchester feel when they want to send their son or daughter to Abertay University, but parents in Paris get it paid for, but actually the Scottish Government saying to Manchester and Cardiff, actually, no, we're not going to do that. I don't see how the bonds of friendship, I just think this is very ill thought through.
Well, the best solution, of course, would be for the UK Government to get rid of tuition fees. Maybe a future Labour government would do that for students down south. But of course, it's a requirement under EU law that you treat EU students coming here in the same way as you treat your domicile students. So it's not that we've chosen to do that, that's the position. It's the position in every EU country. If Scots go to a country to study where tuition is free, they would benefit as well from that country's higher education policy. What we would be concerned about is, of course, that we would want to make sure that the number of places here in further and higher education in particular, are here for Scottish students. And you can see obviously where the problem would arise if that wasn't the case, with a number of particular English students coming north of the border. But I do hope that perhaps a future UK government will do the right thing and remove tuition fees so that students in England, Wales and Northern Ireland can also get access to free higher education. Maybe Jenny's party could have a wee look at that.
Thank you very much. There's a student just dying to get in here, so...
Yes. So basically, I get what you're both saying about the tuition fees, but really I think it comes down to, like, are you supposed to be from Scotland, Scottish or English? Because right now this is really close to my heart, because I had to move abroad because of my mum getting a job there. And in England now, I'm not allowed a student loan because I've been outside the UK for more than 3 years. My family's from Scotland, but because I haven't been through the education system in Scotland, I I don't get the tuition fees for wanting to come here. So right now, I was born in England, but I'm Scottish, and right now I'm in this dilemma of, well, what am I now? Because I'm not allowed to be in England or get finances because I've been out of the UK, and I'm not Scottish either. So right now it's kind of, I don't know, how would you define being English or Scottish or the UK even?
I don't think the answer to that question can be given in general terms. I think you need to see your MSP or your MP about it.
Well, it does sound like maybe something to maybe get more detail on. I mean, the citizenship rules that we've laid out and proposals are in the white paper, and it depends. There's a whole range of categories depending on not just where you were born, but in terms of parents and so on and so forth, that may or may not qualify you for Scottish citizenship post-independence. What you'll have to do is to have a look and see whether that would... But you could obviously apply if you didn't automatically qualify for Scottish citizenship. There would be nothing to stop you applying given your Scottish connections, and that's something you could have a look at.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to have one very last question, and it's going to come from Robin Donoghue, who is the president of the Students' Association. You just get one question. You choose your question. It's the last one.
Okay, so I'm going to ramble a little bit and then end with the question, if that's okay.
A wee bit of ramble.
Okay, that's fine. So yes, hi. So I sat in this audience probably 4 years ago when I did the Thinking Module, and I did Media, Culture and Society, which is probably one of the degrees that Alex suggests that people shouldn't do because I have no idea what I'm going to do as a job. But that's not why I came to university. That's not why my parents helped fund me through university, and that's not why I worked. I'm trying not to swear. I worked really hard to get my degree, and actually that did take a lot of work, and that did take a lot of support from amazing lecturers and amazing people around me. But what I'm trying to suggest is that in this room, it's really exciting that we see so many young people engaged in politics, and in a politics that's not about party politics in the way that Jenny kind of tried to pigeonhole certain politicians and try and compare them to your archetypal Farages or your token Tories or however you want to define people. What we actually see is people asking questions about their experience of living in Scotland and about their experience of studying and their experience of working within the UK and within Scotland, and that's what politics should be about. So what I want to ask is, in either an independent Scotland or continuing in the UK, is there any guarantee from any of the political parties that 16 and 17-year-olds will continue to be allowed to vote as they are in the referendum? Because I think that's a really exciting and potentially useful position for political parties to take, because I think what we see in this room and within this campaign is a lot of young people engaged in politics like they never have been before.
So how do we keep that engagement going? Patrick Harvey, 16, 17-year-olds voting, how do we keep the engagement going?
I think it's a fantastic thing that 16 and 17-year-olds are able to vote in this referendum. I'm not sure if that goes for everybody on the panel. I don't remember Alex's position on this, but I suspect it goes for the majority. That we're all happy to see that happen. I suspect we would also be happy to be able to give you a commitment that 16 and 17-year-olds will be able to vote in elections as well, but we can't. At the moment, it's a power that Westminster holds. The Scottish Parliament doesn't have the ability to change its own election rules. It's been able to do that for relatively minor things like the pilot on elected health boards and the Crofting Commission. It's been able to do it for those minor things. It can't do it for mainstream elections at the moment. So whatever the result, I hope that the Scottish Parliament gains the power, whether it's with full independence or with some flavour of jam tomorrow, and we can decide whether we believe those or not. We should have the power to decide that for ourselves. And I'd like to argue that if we get a good, strong turnout of 16 and 17-year-olds in this referendum, we'll help to advance the case for votes at 16 in all elections. Because if schools can get more confident at doing voter education in the classroom in a neutral way, making sure that young people know how to register, that voting feels normal. We know that if you vote the first time you're entitled to, most people keep on voting. If you don't vote the first time you're entitled to, a lot of people are into their 30s before they start, if ever. And if we want to churn out cohorts of not just people who've got the right to vote, but people who know that they can vote, who know how to vote, who feel that it's a normal thing to do, votes at 16 would be fantastic to do it. There's a wider point as well, though, and again, I hope it's one that we all agree on, that the wider civic engagement in politics has been fantastic through this. If we get the 75%, 80% turnout that we're expecting in this referendum, that's something like a quarter or a third of the electorate who've been ignoring elections for a long, long time now. Repairing, reconnecting a broken political system is what this is about. And it would be disastrous, even in the context of a yes vote that I would welcome. It would be terrible if we'd pull up the drawbridge again and say politics is for political parties and parliamentarians and don't maintain that link, that politics is for every one of us. Every person in society needs to know that they can make a difference by getting involved.
Alex Johnson.
I voted against the clause that allowed 16 and 17-year-olds to participate in this referendum. I did so for a number of reasons, but there's one in particular which I still think gives me cause for concern. But on the general issue of 16 and 17-year-olds voting, I'm delighted to look at what's happening and assess it through the process of this referendum. I think so far it's been very positive, and I'm likely, unless something happens, to take a very similar view once the process is passed. One of the reasons that I actually voted against it is that I was worried about the whole concept of real politics being taken right into our schools. There was a lot of time in the past when very few people stayed on much more than 16 years of age in the schools, and you didn't vote until you were 18 or 21 or whatever. These two ages have been coming closer together, and now they've crossed over. So there are a large number of people within our schools who will have a vote as a result of this change. And what that's done may be positive for those who have a vote. It's actually been very negative in the way schools have behaved, because traditionally I have found that schools wish to engage with politicians, particularly at election time, talk about these issues, but I know that one local authority in particular in the North East has banned all contact and all connection during the course of this referendum campaign. And I think that has undermined that strong link that used to exist, and unfortunately it was caused by the fact that the schools are quite terrified that they may be accused of influencing pupils.
Okay. Thank you very much. Shona Robertson, just quickly yourself and Jenny.
I very much agree with what Patrick Harvey said on 2 points. One, we have a long history of support for 16, 17-year-olds getting the vote, and with independence we would certainly want to make sure that becomes the norm at election time. But Patrick's other point is really, really important. This has energised and involved a whole range of people of all ages and all walks of life, and it's really important that we keep that enthusiasm going. There'll be huge opportunities for that, whether it's about the written constitution or just getting people involved in various aspects of politics, not just party politics, but politics in a general sense. I think that'll be really good for Scotland going forward.
Thank you. And Jenny?
Thanks, Wallace. Yeah, Robin, I've always been in favour of votes for 16, 17-year-olds. I voted for it in the Scottish Parliament. And I was thinking, you know, when maybe if you guys are new to Dundee, you'll know that when you're heading down towards the city square, you'll walk down Reform Street, and Reform Street's called after one of the great Reform Acts that extended the franchise across the United Kingdom to working people, because my ancestors didn't have the vote. And I think, like that Great Reform Act and votes for women, I hope we can achieve votes for 16, 17-year-olds across the UK, but also across the European Union. And I would urge you, if you feel passionately about it, to actually make it a campaign. I know you're a good campaigner, across the European Union for votes for 16 and 17-year-olds. I think it's a privilege that young people across Europe should enjoy.
Thank you very much. We're going to close, and we're going to actually do it slightly more quickly than I'd instructed. So one minute each to make your closing statements. Yeah? Okay? just to close things off. So maybe start with Alex Johnson in relation to coming back to the motion about Scotland and independence. A 1 minute summary, and please do stick to the minute.
Okay. Just do it for here.
Yeah, do it for you. That's fine.
When do my minutes start? 15 seconds ago. I think we've had a good debate here today, and what we've demonstrated is that there are people from different political parties who are prepared to put aside some of their differences and work together on key issues. I think we are better together. I think Britain has delivered so much for us here in Scotland and can continue to deliver so much in the future. I think we've had a constructive debate in which we've covered some but not all of the key points. But the key message that I want to get across to you is that Britain has delivered. Britain will continue to deliver. This is one of the strongest nations on the face of the earth that has the wealth necessary to deliver what we need here in Scotland for years to come. Don't miss the opportunity to vote for the Union, to reinforce these links and make sure that that good work continues for generations to come.
Thank you. Patrick Harvey.
I think I've made it fairly clear that I disagree with Alex's central argument there that the UK, the Union, has worked for all of you and for all of us. I think the UK has been running a failed economic system for far too long. I think a new economic model is already rising. It's only beginning to, but it's already rising around the world. The changes that are happening with a more interconnected world, with a more resource efficient and renewable world, this is the change that's inevitable. It has to come because it's the only way that we can survive. And I want to close by mentioning the one word in the question up there that I didn't address earlier. It's time. I think Scotland's got the resources that are absolutely right for the change that's coming in our economy. The renewable energy resources that we can harness not just for the benefit of one bunch of multinationals or another, but harness in a way that benefits all of us through community and public ownership as well. The skills of our population and the ability that we have to be part of the modern world. I think we've got the resources that are necessary. I think this is an ideal time for Scotland to become independent, to take the responsibility to ourselves to build a better society and contribute to a better world.
Jenny Mara.
Scotland is an outward-looking nation. It always has been. You go around the world and you can see the work and the influence of pioneers and technologists and doctors, people who have gone out, created wealth, created trading structures, created the mercantile system that's moved into our modern industrial economy. We have always been an outward-looking country. We've always joined hands with people in other countries to achieve things. The thing I don't like about this proposition is we put up barriers and borders. We need to remain an outward-looking society. We need to work with our friends and colleagues across these islands, across the European Union and internationally to build a progressive country. I think I've outlined a few measures today that I believe we have made social progress in this country, and my ambition for that is unbinding, but I think we have a better opportunity to do it in the United Kingdom.
Shona Robertson.
Scotland will continue to be an outward-looking nation. We will take our place alongside all the other nations of this world. I think we have a lot to give. We have a lot to contribute, and that will be a positive thing for Scotland to be able to be a peace-loving nation, to join the countries in the world that want to make social progress. We will continue to have a fantastic social union with our nearest neighbours. Those family ties will absolutely continue, but the decisions about our economy and our political independence being made here in Scotland is the key thing that will change. And no one cares about Scotland more than the people who live and work here. The people like you in this room, the people out there. You are the best people to decide the destiny of this country, and you will be able to elect the governments that you choose to run our country, to make Scotland the better place that we all know that it can be, and you can do that by voting yes on the 18th of September.
I'd just like to say a really big thank you to each of our politicians for giving up their time and coming here to engage in debate. So a very big thank you to them all for an excellent debate. And we're going to go to the final vote. Okay? So I'm going to open the polling. And let's see if there's been any change. Please do vote. There's usually one clicker between two, roughly, so have that discussion with your neighbour and make sure you vote. 1 for agree, 2 for disagree, and 3 for don't know. Keep voting. Keep voting. We need to get a few more votes in here. Come on. Keep voting. Keep the responses going. Come on. Keep going, we've still got a few more. Okay, ladies and gents, let's see what the score is. Whoa. Okay. So, in terms of the Abertay student audience for the first year thinking module, we certainly have a victory. For the Yes campaign, 2/3 of you agree that it's time for Scotland to become an independent nation state. About 1/3 of you disagree with that proposition, and there's still a very, very small number of you who are undecided. Thank you very much, and do make sure that you return your voting devices to Roddy and Kevin, and make sure you go and read up on this and this whole topic for the follow-up classes. Thank you very much.